In this short video, I'm going to show you how you can use the ePrep to create a series of calibration standards by automatically incrementing aliquots of a stock standard into a series of vials. I'll take you through the tablet software and set up each of the tasks which will define the workflow. And then finally, we will see the ePrep execute this workflow. The workflow will consist of firstly adding diluent to each of the vials, followed by the addition of an aliquot of a stock standard. Any other solution can also be added, and we shall add internal standard to the same vial. And then the vial is finally made up to volume to complete the standard. So let's get started on the workflow. In this workflow, we make 6 standards, starting with the first vial by taking an aliquot of 100 microliters of a stock standard, adding an aliquot of internal standard, and then making this vial up to 1 ml volume. For the next 5 vials, we will be incrementing the amount of the stock standard by 10 microliters each time, so 110, 120, 130 microliters, and so on. So first up, we create a new workflow by selecting New. The first task we will add to this workflow is Add Diluent. The next task we will add will be Serial Dispense. For the next part of the workflow, we will be adding an internal standard, so we'll add this task. Finally, we will make our 6 standard solutions up to the 1 ml volume. It is good practice to add a diluent as the first step for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the stock standard won't be dispensed into an empty glass vial, which could result in possible absorption of polar compounds onto the glass surface. And secondly, we will achieve better precision and accuracy if the needle is dipped below the level of the diluent when the stock standard is dispensed. Then after the diluent, the ePrep will add successively the stock standard, the internal standard, and then lastly, the solution is made up to volume. We will now start filling out the tasks by choosing the appropriate syringes and nominating the volumes we want to use. For the first task, Add Diluent, we are going to add 500 microliters of diluent, so we will use a 1 ml or a 1000 microliter syringe. So we enter the diluent amount of 500 microliters, and you can see that that appears as part of the first task. So for the next task, we are going to use a 1000 microliter syringe for our stock standard, and the starting dispensing volume will be 100 microliters. And the volume increment we will set to 10 microliters. This will make a working calibration standard range of 1 to 1.5 ppm from a stock standard concentration of 10 ppm. We can easily control the working calibration range by either varying the final makeup volume or changing the increment volume and the stock standard concentration. For example, if we had set the starting dispense volume to 100 microliters and the increment volume to 100 microliters as well from a stock standard of 1 ppm, and then decided to make the volume up to 1 ml, the final working range in this case would be 0.1 to 0.6 ppm for the 6 vials. Next, for our internal standard, we will use a 100 microliter syringe and then enter the amount of 100 microliters. And finally, for the last task, we will choose a 1000 microliter syringe because the ePrep will make the vial up to a volume of 1000 microliters. Note that we don't have to nominate the actual makeup volume amount, as the software will calculate this amount for us. So to recap at this point, all of our tasks have been chosen and the syringes required selected, and the volume of liquid has been associated with each of the tasks. You will perhaps notice that the color tag associated with each task is red, telling us that we haven't fully completed the workflow and there is a conflict somewhere. This is expected at this point because we haven't allocated the input and output tubes. We could check the errors by clicking on the error button, but for now, we will continue with the workflow. So the next step is to choose containers for all the input vials, such as the diluent, samples, internal standards, and then to choose the output containers where the sample and reagents are added. We start this process by firstly setting up the deck by selecting the diluent tubes. To set the deck up, we select Configure Racks. And in this workflow, we are only going to use 3 racks, one to contain the diluent, one rack to contain the stock standard, and the internal standard. And the third rack will contain the output tubes for our finally prepared standards. So we will select the solvent rack in position number 2. Then we'll grab the Bellac rack and put this in position 5 for our stock standard and internal standard solutions. The Bellac rack can house 24 large vials and is used quite a lot. And finally, we will add the Waters rack to position 9. You can see how easy through the drag and drop feature it is to select racks and add them to the deck. Our racks are now in place and will accept those changes. The next part of the process is to nominate the actual containers to be used and the starting volume if that is applicable. The first dispense is diluent, and for this we will use 2 reagent jars. So we start at position 1 and end at position 2. And we have 50 ml of diluent in each of these jars. When we accept these changes and select this group, you can now see these jars associated with the first task as the input vials. This connection of the input containers with the task occurred because we started this container process by firstly selecting the input tubes for the add diluent task. We will continue this process by next selecting our stock standard tube, which will be located in the middle rack in position 1. The starting volume of the standard will be 25 ml. Next, we'll select our internal standard tube, and this will be located in the middle rack in position number 8. So we will click at that location. Then select that position to both start and end at. We will have 25 ml of internal standard, so we enter this amount in the software. And then that appears as group 3 associated with the internal standard task. Finally, we will select the diluent container from group 1 for the makeup to volume task. At this stage of the process, all the input tubes have been defined, so now we have to define the output tubes. For this workflow, the output tubes will be 2 ml vials located here in these Waters racks, and we'll select the first 6 vials from position 1 to position 6 for the output tubes. Accept the changes and choose Select. Now that the workflow has been completed, you see the tag color associated with each task has changed from red to green, showing there are no conflicts and all syringes match the volumes required. There is enough volume in each of the containers to carry out the workflow, and all the input and output containers have been defined. We will save this workflow and give it a name of Calibration Standards. And select Save. We are now ready to run, so we'll choose Run, and you will see that the deck is displayed, showing each of the racks and the allocated containers. Once you have checked all the syringes are in place and the containers are all set, we can start the workflow by choosing Press to confirm and Continue. We can now see the ePrep in action. We won't see the whole workflow, but we shall show enough to appreciate the automation capability of the ePrep. The first step in the workflow is the ePrep will execute the dispense diluent task. Because the ePrep is dispensing 500 microlitres from a 1000 microlitre syringe, the syringe can dispense one complete volume into the first 2 vials. To save viewing time here, we won't see all the syringe changes and syringe wash-ins, but instead focus on the syringe dispensing. We'll skip the next 4 vials and catch up with the ePrep as it is carrying out the serial dispense task. For this task, it is dispensing 100 microlitres into vial 1 and then incrementing this amount by 10 microlitres each time for the next 5 vials. So 110 microlitres into vial 2, 120 microlitres into vial 3, and so on. If our stock standard was 10 ppm, we would be creating a working calibration standard range of 1 to 1.5 ppm. Because we are using a total volume dispense of 910 microlitres for all of the 6 tubes and using a 1000 microlitre syringe, the syringe doesn't need to return to the stock standard container to refill, so we can carry out this task quickly. We will show the syringe change before the internal standard task. The 1000 microlitre syringe needs to be changed to the 100 microlitre syringe, and this is occurring now. For the internal standard task, we will only show the aliquoting from the internal standard solution into the first vial. And the final task will be to make all of the 6 vials up to volume, which can be carried out in 2 sets with the 1000 microlitre syringe. The syringe will dispense the makeup volumes for vials 1 to 3, return to the diluent container to get more solvent, and finish the job for vials 4 to 6. So as the syringe is washed for the final time, our standards rack is ready to transfer directly to the instrument's autosampler.